Well, greetings everybody. Thank you very much for coming tonight. I think we will start our event. It's an honour always to be gathered together both with Canberra Interfaith Forum and with Religions for Peace Australia to host an annual interfaith event for World Interfaith Harmony Day, which is today. So I will just very briefly acknowledge country because Anne Pattel-Gray will be speaking later and giving us a formal welcome to country. So we thank you very much for doing that for us. So please, Kanti, would you come and give us a prayer?
Good evening. Sawadi. I'd like to share with you a prayer that I have every morning, and it's a simple one. Tameva mata cha pita tameva, tameva bandhu sakha tameva, tameva vidya dravinam tameva, tameva sarvam mama deva deva. Simply, in English, it means, you are my mother. You are my father. You are my relative, O Lord. You are my friend, Bandhu. You are my education. You are my wealth. You are everything to me. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you, Kanti. I should have introduced myself. My name is Philippa Rowland, and I'm the Chair of Religions for Peace Australia. Please come in and be welcome, and thank you for making the time to join us. It's wonderful to have you here with us. Today, we're celebrating World Interfaith Harmony Day, and in our agenda, the Chair of Canberra Interfaith Forum, Mr. Dean Sahu Khan, will introduce our very wonderful guest speaker for today, who is Professor Anne Pattel-Gray. She will give us her talk, which will be followed by a 1-minute quiet, silent reflection. And then we'll have an opportunity to go into groups of 3 and have a sharing about how we found that and to distill out some questions so that we have a collective, collaborative program for trying to get our questions. We'll then hear from Bishop Philip Huggins, who will talk about Religions for Peace Australia's initiative to try and establish a multi-faith council for Australia, because we hear much more from multicultural spaces than from multi-faith, but it's a really important part of social cohesion for this country. World Interfaith Harmony Week is devoted to strengthening the ideals of peace within and amongst all nations and all peoples. It was launched by the United Nations in 2011 as a decentralised initiative held across the world in the first week of February in each year. It's a week of interfaith dialogue and interaction to collectively tackle important social issues. It's essential that we resist division, misunderstanding and mistrust among peoples of different religions and backgrounds. Humanity everywhere is bound together by mutual interests. Our shared faith commandments to love God in whatever form we understand that to be, and to love our neighbours as ourselves. to care for each other and to care for the earth and promote the good in a troubled and suffering world. At the core of all faiths is a recognition that we all share this life together and that we need to love and support one another to live in harmony and peace in an environmentally sustainable way on this one Mother Earth that we all share. Yet our world continues to be beset by conflict and intolerance, with a rising number of refugees and internally displaced peoples in a hostile and unwelcoming world. Unfortunately, we also witness messages of hate that spread discord among people. So we feel the need for spiritual guidance, prayer, and harmony between us has never been greater. We'd like to welcome special guests here today with us. Mr. Ruchabum Bunrad, the Minister from the Royal Thai Embassy, the Honourable Linda Burney MP, thank you for coming amidst the many bells we've been hearing ringing, and the Honourable Peter Khalil, Special Envoy for Social Cohesion, and Melanie McKenzie, Acting First Assistant Secretary for the Office of Community Cohesion. I'm not sure if Maria Maki is here, Senior Advisor to Tony Burke, and we're hoping that the former VC of the University of Divinity in Melbourne, well known to our speaker Anne Pattel-Gray, is also hoping to come, Professor Peter Sherlock. We'd also like to acknowledge that we have quite a number of people gathered around the country on Zoom, and one thing they were asked to do was to perhaps share from where they are, and I might even ask our Administrator Sarah Hagar to let us know who is here if you can. But I want to acknowledge before then both our webmaster, Reverend Chris Parnell at the front, and Mark Proctor, who between them have really sorted out our ability to video and Zoom and record this. But we've heard from them that in fact the microphones are so good that everything you whisper and say can be heard. So if you can please restrain chatter and laughter while people are speaking in our keynote, then that means that the people on Zoom get to actually hear what's being said at the front. So today we'd really especially like to thank Russell Broadbent MP and Maria Van Vakenu MP for their long support in helping us run this event for the previous 7 years, and wish them well in this term of government. Sue, is there anyone or anything I've forgotten?
I think also our First Nations person, as Professor Asmi Wood.
Forgive me, Professor Asmi.
Welcome.
You were at the top of the list, so that was my mental blindness in trying to be quick. I do apologise. Sarah, do we have any indication how many people are on Zoom?
We have 51 people on Zoom, and not everyone has said where they're from, but we do have quite a few people from New South Wales, Tasmania, Victoria, and Western Australia.
Fantastic.
There's others who have put their name, but that's okay.
Lovely.
That wasn't a negative thing. I don't want to, I'm not telling anyone off. But we've got someone from Queensland there today.
Good, wonderful. Well, I'd like now, if I could, to pass over to Dean to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippa, for that. I was handed, I asked for a biography and I was handed something, and I was asked to read only what I think is relevant. I know she's got about 35 minutes to speak, but I'll take 40 minutes to introduce her. She's a very distinguished individual, and honestly, I did not know what to leave out in reading out and in introducing her. So Professor Dr. N. Pattel-Gray is a distinguished scholar, theologian, activist, and prolific writer. She is a descendant of the Bidjara Nation, if I'm pronouncing it right,
That's
in Queensland, and a renowned Aboriginal leader both nationally and internationally. Professor Pattel-Gray holds a PhD, surprise, surprise, from the University of Sydney, awarded in 1995, with a major focus on Aboriginal religion and spirituality. And a Doctor of Divinity from India, awarded in 1997. As the former head of the School of Indigenous Studies at the University of Divinity in Melbourne, Professor Pattel-Gray has made significant contributions in the academic studies of, for, and with Indigenous communities. She has previously held the position of the Executive Secretary and founded Islander Commission with the Australian Council of Churches, National Council of Churches in Australia from 1989 to 1998. During this time, she organized the Indigenous participation in the 1991 World Council of Churches 7th Assembly in Canberra, and was responsible for establishing the Indigenous desk at the WCC. Professor Pattel-Gray is a member of the Institute of Indigenous Knowledge at Melbourne University, Indigenous Advisory Committee, and a Fellow of the Worsley Centre in Melbourne. She is currently appointed Commissioner to the World Council of Churches, Commission for World Mission and Evangelism. Historically, she has worked with the, make it short, WCC from the late 1980s through to the early 2000s on commissions such as the Program to Combat Racism, Urban-Rural Mission, and has twice presented at the Central Committee on Indigenous Issues. Her work with the Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress of the Uniting Church in Australia includes organizing the largest Indigenous protest march of over 50,000 people, the March for Justice, Freedom, and Hope, led by Reverend Charles Harris in 1988 against the bicentenary. Professor Dr. Pattel-Gray is a recognized expert in decolonizing biblical narratives and developing Indigenous theology. She interprets biblical narratives through an Indigenous cultural lens, bringing significant insights into the cultural knowledge and religious life of course, the Aboriginal people and the, inverted commas, black spelled with BLAK, women's perspectives. Her work exposes the historical truth of colonization and its missionization and its impact on First Nations people of Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, I think she deserves a good round of applause and asking her to take the dice.
Thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity to express my appreciation to Religion for Peace Australia's chair and its members, and also to the Canberra Interfaith Forum for inviting me to deliver the keynote address at this year's 2025 World Interfaith Harmony Week. It is an honour to be here with you all this evening and to have this opportunity to share with you our spirituality and faith, which is a topic that is dear to my heart. But before I begin, I would like to take a moment for an acknowledgement of country. We are gathered on the lands of the Ngunnawal Nation, who have never ceded their sovereignty, whose lands are a place where some of us work and live, and I want to pay my respect to their ancestors and their elders, both past and present, and to acknowledge those Indigenous people who are here with us tonight, either in the room, wonderful to have my sister and brother with me, and online. It is great to have your support. An acknowledgement of country is a cultural protocol that we First Nations people do as a way to pay our respect to other First Nations peoples. It reminds us of our ancient wisdom that is embedded in this land, and we Indigenous nations people have lived on and cared for 110,000 years, and we are considered the oldest living culture in the world. I want to provide some insights into our spirituality and faith. We are a relational people. We long to have a relationship with you, and we want to learn about your religion, culture, and faith, and to gain a better understanding of who you are and what is important to you, and how to show you respect and to reciprocate our knowledge, culture, and faith with you. We would welcome an opportunity for you to sit on country with us and to share our ancient wisdom with you, and for you to experience our culture, spirituality, and life ways, in the hope you gain insights and understanding of our relationship to and with the Creator Spirit, our spirit ancestors, and creation. We would share our Creator Spirit's actions and interactions through our ancestral spirits in the creation of our world, humanity, customs, laws, ceremonies, songs, rituals, relationship to land, water and sea, language, cosmology, epistemology, worldview, and philosophy. This being the basis to the formation of our identity, spirituality, and faith. Indigenous scholars have worked tirelessly to research and gather Indigenous knowledges, and for many of us it is a highly valuable and important knowledge to have and retain. Indigenous knowledge holders or keepers are important and highly respected members of our communities as they safeguard the retention of our knowledge. They spend up to 40 years learning and practicing this information, and not just anyone is chosen to hold this key role. Indigenous knowledge is transmitted from an early age. An Indigenous child is taught the names of plants, how they are used and where to find them, and the seasons in which they flourish. This is the same for animals, rivers, and seas. Australian First Nations have vast knowledge systems which we have continuously created, maintained and adapted this rich and complex knowledge tradition steeped in unique relations between people and place. We have developed a nuanced understanding of local ecologies, the behaviours of human and non-human species, weather, cycles of seasons, celestial bodies, and the healing properties of plants, develop sophisticated forms of governance and diplomacy, performance and art, and imagine our place within the cosmos in profound and prophetic ways. Australia's First Nations people maintain an oral tradition. It has been asked as to how we Indigenous peoples retain all this knowledge, as we have no library and there isn't a place that holds all our important information like Western societies. When non-Indigenous peoples learn about our songlines and the knowledge that is retained by us, they are overwhelmed. Non-Indigenous scholars marvel at the intellectual capacity of our people to hold vast volumes of information in our knowledge systems and to be able to retain such information. This is made possible through our songlines. This knowledge is retained by us through our songlines, which is how we archive and hold information, important knowledge given to us by the Creator Spirit through our spirit ancestors. This knowledge is taught by senior members of our kinship system. Knowledge is learning about law, ceremonies, kinship, including about our connection to country. Our songlines hold all our ancestral narratives, law, ceremonies, songs, dances, rituals, arts is maintained and held by Aboriginal knowledge holders and keepers. Paddy Rowe, an Aboriginal elder from the Kimberley region, states, "Our history is written in the land, deep in the land, transmitted via songlines. In our Indigenous worldview, all that we believe and hold important begins and ends with country. It is where our ancestral narratives are confirmed. It is where everything we know and understand is retained in our songlines. Country holds information, innovation, stories and secrets. From medicine, engineering, ecology and astrology to social mores on how to live, social organisations, including moiety divisions and kinship systems. It is the source from which all knowledge originates and gives rise to the expression, our history is written in the land. By history, we mean all knowledge, science, humanities, and ancestral knowledge. These songlines show the intellectual capacity of Australia's First Nations people and our cognitive prowess to retain such vast amount of information that is critical to our lifeways and being. It takes an Indigenous man or woman some 40 years to learn everything there is to learn in a particular songlines. For example, this involves knowing all the songs, the cycles, and associated dances, visiting all the sacred sites, knowing all the subjects, sacred subjects and objects, and learning all the designs that encode the information to which you are entitled. Authority and power are granted to those who emerge as knowledge keepers. Throughout this long process, access to knowledge is considered both a right and a privilege. With this knowledge comes responsibilities for the stories, the songs, the ceremonies, art, and of course, the songlines themselves. Sadly, the wider Australian population has not taken the time to get to know us or learn about our spiritual beliefs, culture, and kinship system. They have assumed us to be inferior, primitive, and pagan. We have suffered significant racism, oppression, and genocidal acts committed against our nations. Many white Australians do not know their own history, where Christianity was and still is the running dog of British imperialism, invasion and colonisation that leaves Australia First Nations people destitute. Today in Australia, we are faced with such divisive times where we see the rise of fascism. These fascist groups need to be identified as terrorist groups and outlawed. There should be a clear statement of what a hate crime is, and people who carry out racist and anti-Semitic acts of violence should not be tolerated in our society. They should be arrested and incarcerated. The anti-Semitic acts and racist abuse and violence on non-Western people and communities is on the increase, and it is a fearful time for all of us. It is a frightening time in Australia for non-Western people. We are vulnerable to be targeted by racist attacks, violence and abuse. Over the past several decades, we have witnessed unbelievable violence around the world and so much hatred. In Australia, we observed our own politicians who run elections on anti-social comments that could be perceived as racist and condemning of not just my people, but of other non-Western people and communities. The one thing we have learned is if you don't conform and submit to the dominant power's ideals of what white Australia should look like, then you are either ostracised or shut out of any economic or social benefit. In 1993, the then Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Paul Keating, delivered a powerful speech to launch the International Year of the World's Indigenous Peoples that reflected great maturity, truth and integrity as our nation's leader, where he confronts the non-Indigenous nation to take a deep look at themselves and challenge them to examine who they are. This statement is even more relevant today, some 2 decades on. Keating describes Australia's failure as a nation to address the historical injustices and where they had not managed to extend opportunity and care, dignity and hope to Indigenous peoples of Australia. This is a fundamental test, he said, of our social goals and our national will. Our ability to say to ourselves and to the rest of the world that Australia is a first-rate social democracy, that we are what we should be truly, the land of a fair go and better chance. This is perhaps the point. We need to bring the dispossessed out of the chateaus, to recognise that they are part of us and that we cannot give Indigenous Australians up without giving up many of our own most deeply held values, much of our own identity and our own humanity. Nowhere in the world, I would venture, is the message more stark than it is in Australia. We simply cannot sweep injustices aside, even if our conscience allows us to. I'm sure that in due course the world and the people of our region would not. There should be no mistake about this. Our success in resolving these issues will have a significant bearing on our standing in the world. However intractable the problem seems, we cannot resign ourselves to failure anymore. Then we can hide behind the contemporary version of social Darwinism, which says that to reach back for the poor and dispossessed is to risk being dragged down. That seems to me not only morally indefensible, but bad history. We non-Aboriginal Australians should perhaps remind ourselves that Australia once reached out for us. Didn't Australia provide opportunity and care for the dispossessed Irish, the poor of Britain, the refugees from war and famine and persecution in the countries of Europe, Africa and Asia? Isn't it reasonable to say that if we can build a prosperous and remarkable, harmonious multicultural society in Australia, surely we can find just solutions to the problem which besets the first Australians, the people to whom the most injustices have been done. And I say, he continues, the starting point might be to recognise the problem starts with us non-Aboriginal Australians. It begins, I think, with the act of recognition that it was we, non-Indigenous people, who did the dispossessing. We took the traditional lands and smashed the traditional ways of life. We brought the diseases, the alcohol. We committed the murders, the children from their mothers. We practiced discrimination and exclusion. It was our ignorance, our prejudice, and our failure to imagine these things being done to us. With some noble exceptions, we failed to make the most basic human response and enter with them to bring them into our hearts and minds. We failed to ask, how would I feel if this was done to me? As a consequence, we failed to see that what we were doing degraded all of us. If we needed a reminder of this, we received it this year. The past lives on in inequality, racism and injustice, in the prejudice and the ignorance of non-Aboriginal Australians, and in the demoralisation and desperation, the fractured identity of so many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Over the years, there have been no shortage of guilt, but it has not produced the response we need. The message should be that there is nothing to fear or to lose in the recognition of a historical truth, or the extension of social justice, or the deepening of Australia's social democracy to include Indigenous Australians. There is everything to gain. Even the unhappy past speaks for this. Where Aboriginal Australians have been included in the life of Australia, they have made remarkable contributions. Economic contributions, particularly in the pastoral and agricultural industry. They are there in the frontier and exploration history of Australia. They are there in the wars, in the sport, to an extraordinary degree. In literature, art, music, academic scholarship. In all these things, they have shaped our knowledge of this continent and of ourselves. They have shaped our identity. They are there in the Australian legends. We should never forget the contribution that Australia's First Nations people have made. They have helped build this country, and if we have a sense of justice as well as common sense, we will forge a new partnership. As I said, it might help us if we non-Aboriginal Australians imagined ourselves dispossessed of our land we had lived on for 50,000 years, and then imagined ourselves told that it had never been ours. Imagine if ours was the oldest culture in the world and we were told that it was worthless. Imagine if we had resisted this settlement, suffered and died in the defence of our land, and then were told in history books that we had given up without a fight. Imagine if non-Aboriginal Australians had served their country in peace and war and were then ignored in history books and denied benefits given to our returned soldiers. Imagine if our feats on sporting fields had inspired admiration and patriotism and yet did nothing to diminish prejudice. There is one thing today we cannot imagine. We cannot imagine that the descendants of peoples whose genius and resilience maintained a culture here through 50,000 years or more, through cataclysmic changes to the climate and environment, who then survived 2 centuries of dispossession and abuse, will be denied their place in modern Australian nation. The reason I go on about our history is because many of you people do not know our history, and I'm wanting to share some of that with you as a process of truth-telling. We Indigenous nations of Australia continue to struggle to be recognised as First Nations people and to be respected for the significant contributions we have made in academia, sports, in the film industry, politics, arts, medicine, ecology and astronomy. Australia's First Nations religious perspective involves an ancient spirituality and tradition that enables a lived experience of the Creator Spirit with people, land and creation, nurtured by a deep longing for justice, wholeness and a resistance that gives priority to the cultural lens of First Nations standpoints of trauma and survivors, and to the restoration of justice. It sides with the powerless against the powerful and seeks to speak truth to power, drawing its inspiration from the prophetic path of our Indigenous leaders, both past and present, based on our ancestral narratives formed from our cosmology, worldview and epistemology. Reconciliation can only be found in a process based on the principle of restorative justice. One wonders, under the current political climate, what the future of reconciliation Australia will hold. Today, we take time to reflect on the building of this nation and the context of our multicultural nations. We are proud to be home to so many different ethnic nations. As a multicultural nation, we boast 270 ethnic groups, Australia is considered a secular country with a diverse migrant and refugee populations with over 120 faiths, which is fabulous. Isn't that incredible? We need to ensure that you, along with us Indigenous nations, are not confined to being nothing more than cultural dressings to an otherwise white dominant social platform. Although Australia has traditionally been a majority Christian country that has largely ignored, oppressed and marginalised its First Nations peoples, as an Aboriginal woman, I am proudly a Bidjara woman from Queensland with a connection to country that predates British invasion and colonisation. We need to readdress Keating's call to speak truth in defining our colonial history. How do we forge a nation based on truth that includes and shows respect to its First Nations people, in which recognition is given to our spirituality, culture, and embraces our ancient knowledge? It is important to know that we are nations of different faiths. We live our faith through our daily lives. Our faith defines us, and we are who we are because of our faith. It is our spiritual beliefs and faith that moulds our character and holds us accountable to the highest of integrity, truth, and honour. And we wear our faith as a vest to pride. There is a critical need in Australia for a greater understanding of each other's cultural and religious differences. This will enable us to find common ground and build stronger relationships that allow respect for each other to grow. As what we bring, we enhance our nation and contribute to living harmoniously with each other. What we bring is an Indigenous and a multicultural lens that should shape government policy. And our identity as a nation, and it should embrace principles of our collective faith and define the qualities we require in our leaders. We need to be mindful of how we are viewed by the international community. For example, are we viewed as a racist country who treats its non-Western citizens with racist contempt, or with respect, and who embraces them with pride? The image we project is important as it speaks to who we are as a nation. We have so much in common, and with this, we should find ways to unite and build an Australia that ensures investment in our children's future to thrive. Many of us have suffered great injustices, and sadly, this continues today. We are Australia's future, and it is important that Australia is a reflection of its Indigenous and the many multicultural nations. Australia requires leadership that is bold, courageous to confront evil, that holds integrity at its core, respect and equality for all nations that live on this land, and with a generosity of spirit, empathy and compassion to ensure all Australians, regardless of race, flourish and prosper. I wonder if we can be these leaders of tomorrow. Can we be this that brings great transformation to our nation, where respect, truth, justice and understanding is the new norm? Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Professor, for the interesting interesting talk. And I'm sure we all enjoyed it. And I think the usual way, another round of applause for her. All right. The next is that as is our practice, we have a minute's silence. and for us to, it's a reflection time. And you take that opportunity in your own way to think the way you want to think. It's your time. So we will have that now, please. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Can I have your attention, please? Okay. We're waiting for the questions that will be posed. But is there anyone from the floor who would like to say something in response to the presentation, or you have anything personal to say on the topic?
I think it's. Can you hear me? Yeah. I think it's absolutely tragic what's happened ever since, say, the white person has set foot on the lands that we live on. I think I totally respect and admire your courage, and I absolutely think what you hit the nail on the head. And has Linda Burney left?
Yes, she does.
That's a shame. I just wanted to acknowledge her and her very, very single-minded way of trying to educate people about what has happened. The lack of knowledge and the ignorance and the lack of understanding of what First Nations people have gone through. Thank you. You moved closer. Very good. No, thank you. The pain, the trauma that First Nations people have suffered for over 200 years plus, 225 years. So all I can say is, how can we be leaders? That was the question that I heard from you. And I think we need to be leaders when you hear someone being racist or someone being derogatory and say, why do First Nations people get paid to come and do welcome to country? We need to stand up and say, sorry, that is not correct. That is improper. Do you realize what people have gone through? And explain to them why welcome to country is so important. They just think that somebody comes and does welcome to country and gets $200. And they really think that is not fair or not correct. So I just wanted to say, maybe we need to educate people. I have been well educated by Auntie Agnes Shea, who is now passed. I've also been educated by Auntie Isabel Coe. Do you remember her? And the lovely Ellie Gilbert, who's the wife of Kevin Gilbert. So I have had my training. I think a lot of people in Australia haven't had that training. So as us, as multicultural leaders, we need to do that. We need to speak up and say, call out racism. Say, hey, you can't be racist like that. I get it all the time. I'm brown-skinned. So I've lived here for 45 years. It was terrible in 1980.
Yes.
We had no Indian shops where you could go and buy things. But I'm sorry, I'm digressing. To focus on the issue, we need to pray, we need to have leadership. And all of us here, we are leaders in Canberra and from other places, Philip. So we need to keep this up. We need to keep telling people, please try and understand the history. It's not what has been written in the history books. That's incorrect.
Yes.
So that's all I wanted to say. But thank you so much for your talk. I really appreciate it. And if anyone else wants to talk, please come.
Thank you, Shobha.
Thank you.
All right. I think we have two questions on Zoom.
And of course, with your presence here,
Yeah. So the first question is from David Stanfield, and he asks this. He says this. There seems to be a filter. Sorry. There seems to be a filter to getting this message across the membrane within the Christian religious context. Do you have any suggestions on how to get across this?
Look, I think the way forward for us and to get the message out is for us to unite. Us non-Western people, along with our white allies who walk with us, need to unite around a vocal point and a message that is clear and that is stated out there. There is so much work to be done. You are told by this government and other church leaders that are non-Indigenous what you should think or what our history should be. And what you're told is a lot of misconceptions and a lot of lies. Our allies sitting in this room know this, our non-Indigenous allies that are sitting here. They know that this is what is being done repeatedly. And we need to circumnavigate that and put truth on the table. Aboriginal people, we have been fighting this struggle for so long, and we have so many non-Indigenous peoples, multicultural nations who have endured what we've endured. And you've come here looking for peace, prosperity, and an opportunity. But what we're seeing is the rise of hatred in this country towards yous as well, not just only to us. And that worries us. And we say, come on, we've got to unite as a people. We've got to come together and find our strength in unity together and begin to define what we want this country to be. Not by a minority, a dominant minority, but by us. We are the majority. So let's start talking and let's start saying what we want this country to be. And I tell you now, as we do that, you will find more and more white people walking with us because they're all longing for the same thing that you and I are longing for. And that's a home, a country that shows respect to each of us, that values what we bring to the table in our faith, in our religion, in our culture, and we cherish it. That's what should be important here. And each of us has something different to bring. I get excited talking to you guys because if anyone understands me best, it's you, because you have come from a similar experience and you are experiencing what we are experiencing today in this country. So if we can't find reasons to come together, then we're lost, you know. So please come and walk with us. Please come and sit on country. What you don't know, we're prepared to teach you and share with you. That's the one gift that we've been offering Australia for so long, and they have repeatedly rejected it. Repeatedly. Just even the referendum was that rejection. We want to share with you. We don't want to take. We're not about, we're not a people who are, vengeful. We're not a vengeful people. We are a peaceful, loving nation. And we want to embrace everyone that lives in this country. And we want you to love our country like we love it and to be able to communicate with the spirits in this land the way we do.
You got a second question?
Yes, David just says thank you for that. And would like to send you a book from an Arnhem Land elder.
Wonderful.
So,
Please do.
I'll follow up with you on that.
Yeah.
We've got quite a few comments, so I'll say maybe one or two and then go to the room. But Anne Britton has said, as children we were not taught truth about Australian history, particularly how very little of it is the Western exposure. And many of us don't know what we're meant to do, how to be helpful, and fearful of how much energy we need to put into working toward making us a fairer nation. And I think that kind of builds on the next question, which is from Elizabeth Young, who says, thank you for your talk, Anne. I'm wondering about how how better to be in solidarity and allyship as a non-Aboriginal person to highlight and promote Aboriginal culture and spirituality in places where so much has been lost and is being lost through the harms of colonialism. For example, forced movement, language suppression, stolen generations, deaths of elders who carry the stories. So how do we show solidarity?
Look, the best way for people to come and walk with us is to get up and come and meet with us. I really wonder if Religion for Peace should maybe take this opportunity to harness a national gathering with our people, and you come and sit on country for a week and have our people teach you, and we can bring our religious leaders together to talk. And, you know, us women will go separate, men will go separate, and we will talk about who we are, what we are, and about our aspirations and what kind of relationship we want with you. You know, we want one that is fruitful, that is respectful, that, you know, where we can share and take pride in who we are. I would suggest that for non-Indigenous people who want to be on that journey, come and join us and come and sit with us. Introduce yourselves, because we love to know who our allies are. We love to have your presence, and there we can strategize around what kind of things we can do together. And, you know, it'd be great if the churches could sit down on country in this midst as well and hear how they need to be transformative. You know, I go overseas and I sit at a global level of the ecumenical movement of Indigenous peoples from around the globe. And, you know, I sit there and I hear them talking about how their dominant church are supporting them, putting money in for justice and walking with them and being prophetic and holding governments and everybody accountable, but also their church accountable. And when it comes to me and I'm like, and I don't understand, because, you know, the ecumenical movement in this country was a powerful movement. You know, the ecumenical movement in this country supported the land rights movement from the 70s, from the 60s all the way through. They were very much walking with us. And somewhere through the 90s, somehow leadership changed, people retired, but somewhere we lost our prophetic stance. We lost our prophetic voice. And maybe it's because of, you know, the things that have happened in the church, you know, the sexual abuse and you name it and whatever. But I always say to the church leaders, don't allow some people's sin define who we are as a church. You know, yeah, we're paying reparations now, but don't allow that to define us as we go into the future. Together, we can redefine who we are as a faith people in this country. Together. And that's what we need to be doing, working together rather than in opposition with one another. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I think the people on Zoom had the fair share. So is there anybody in this room who would like to ask any questions?
Make a statement.
Sorry.
Or make a statement.
Or make a statement. Thank you. I think you've educated them properly. All right. Is it okay? Yes, Chris.
Thank you, Arnie, for your talk.
Welcome. Please.
Many years ago, Kevin Rudd, Prime Minister, apologised to the stolen generations. And every year they produce the Closing the Gap report about how we care for Indigenous peoples and how we care for their children, how we educate them. There's a sense in which there is still colonialism in the approach to Indigenous peoples, the approach and applying faith to Indigenous peoples and including them in multi-faith issues. I've just been talking with Auntie Anne here about Muslims and the relationship between Muslim peoples, many who convert to Islam because it sets them free and allows them to worship in a way that's congruent with their dreaming. And I think this is an important step forward. And for Multi-Faith Australia, this is something that we need to pay attention to. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Anne, you mentioned about Religions for Peace Australia meeting with you. Are there other things? Because I think this is really important. Where do we move? What steps do we make to help? So is that the first step that you would see us doing, sitting together, or what would you like us to do? We're a very small network, but we are very committed to this issue and First Nations spirituality.
I think maybe the way forward, we begin by establishing a working group or a task group and putting together that has the different faiths represented, as many as we can, to begin to talk about what this event could look like. What would be the significance? Why would we be doing it? And where would we have it? Who would host it? And that'll be my job to go and talk to my mom. But as a people, who would want to be involved? What numbers are we talking about? Are we talking about one collective group, or do we break up into smaller groups, into different traditional lands? So, there's a whole question of logistics that goes with that. But beyond that, let's just start with a working group and begin to work on, because we've got resources to put together. Remember, when we bring you to these places, you're coming to the poor of the poor. You're going to see poverty that's going to astound you in a first world country that's affluent and rich. And you see how it treats its Indigenous peoples. You're going to come and see that, and you're going to sit on country. And we will try to find a place or a location that will allow you to have access to hotels and motels close enough, because you as I said, some of these places are just uninhabitable. But we want to be able to have you see and sit. Our people would be just so proud to have you. You have no idea, wouldn't they? They'd just be so overwhelmed that you would be even interested to come and sit with them, and just to listen and to talk about our spiritual connection to country. But beyond that, how we as a nation begin to shape a nation. What does it mean to live in this country and call ourselves Australians? What does that mean coming from a multi-faith perspective? So let's start with a small working group and then build it from there and look at the resources we need to bring. Let's talk about what terminology we need to bring, but mainly what's the focus of why we're going to do something, because let it be transformative. Let it be a message to this nation, to this government. We're serious and we're talking business. They get nervous, when you and I start getting together. And they have every reason to be nervous, because they know there's so much that we have to share with each other. And together we can make a difference.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So do I take that there's no further comments or questions? Yes.
So first off, thank you.
You're welcome.
Sign me up.
Yes.
That's definitely, that would be a dream of mine. I'd like to relate an event and sort of parlay it into a question, although it's a very open-ended question, if you'll forgive me. A number of years ago, I was at an event, an interfaith event, and one of the speakers was the High Commissioner from New Zealand. And as is traditional in New Zealand culture, she gave, before her speech, she gave a greeting in English and in Maori. And partway through her speech, since we're talking about interfaith-related matters and multicultural matters, she asked, who here can give a greeting in any Australian Aboriginal language? Not a hand went up. Who here can put a sentence together in any Australian language? None. Who here knows a few words? Some hands went up. And that leads me into a secondary matter. Some years ago, a friend commented that you go to a rugby match, a cricket match in New Zealand, and they have the national anthem in both languages. In Australia, English. We ignore our Indigenous population. And I said to him, look, in fairness, Maori is a single language. It's a uniform culture in the nation, but close to. There are several hundred Australian languages, many more that did exist before. And as an amateur linguist, I'm just disgusted with the state of what happened to Aboriginal languages in this country. Which one would they pick for a national anthem in a rugby game? And he said to me, on the surface, that seems like a good argument, but that has been used as an excuse
Not to do it.
by people arguing in bad faith not to do it. And to that end, I would since this continent before white settlement hosted hundreds of different ethnic groups of different nations. And it's unfortunate that non-Indigenous people in this country tend to lump them all together as Aboriginal. How do we go about moving forward with such relations, with such disparate cultures, and bringing to the forefront that there are multiple Aboriginal cultures in this country, and we need to have respect for them all. At the same time, we need to recognize that they're different to each other. As I said, it's going to be a very open-ended question.
Yes.
I guess the question comes to, what do we do?
That's a great question. And one that needs to be a part of our conversation when we sit on country. For all of us to have a conversation. Because, you have an opportunity to pose questions to us as well. And for us to go away as leaders and to talk about how do we resolve this? How do we want to be, reflected upon the languages? We've got 250 active languages left in this country. And each of us would probably have our own idea about how we go about that. But we need to be unified around how we do that collectively. And so those are some questions that would be great for you guys to come back to us with, so we can have those conversations and then come back to you and say, this is how we'd like to proceed forward. And work with you around how to promote that. Because I think, if we want to be recognised and we want to be active and we want languages, culture and everything to be appreciated and valued, then we've got to get our act together as well. One of the biggest problems is we lack resources to do all of this. We have no money, none whatsoever, to even gather people. When I did the assembly in 1991, I got $1 million to bring our people together, to be visible and participating in that assembly. And it was leaders, seculars, church, everyone. And it was powerful. I think you were there, Philip, weren't you? And the numbers was great, hey. We weren't, spot the Aboriginal. It was, they're everywhere, and that's the way we need to do things, to have a presence, even though we're a minority. There are times when we can bring a presence. One of the things that I would say that our people will come back to is, how do we celebrate our faiths together? What might that look like? Could that be an annual festival, a celebration of the multicultural and Indigenous faiths in this country that we make a national standard on, that we call for, a day or a week or whatever it may be? But how do we celebrate together our faith and share a place of public openness where we can come and sit and learn from each other? That would be something that would be inspirational. That would be something we'd like to know as well. In our culture, a lot of our culture is very matriarchal. And it's certainly not visible out there in the world. A lot of people don't realise that. But we allow our men to be spokespersons because It's how the West runs. It's what the church and government have done. They've chosen certain people to represent us, sometimes with our approval, sometimes without our approval. But the workings that go on behind the scenes with these people, some of them are accountable, some of them aren't. The same as your workings. No doubt they'd all be accountable back to their community. Well, the same thing happens for us, is that accountability. And we want to get to know that process from your side, as well as you understanding it from our side. Because, as I said, no one's bothered to get to know us. No one ever comes and sits on country with us. In 200 years, very few people have come and sat on country with us for the point of learning from us. Others have come to indoctrinate us, to tell us what we had to do and to all of these other things, but no one has come to learn. And that's why I went on about our intellectual prowess, our spirituality, our religion, our culture, our faith, is because many people wouldn't even know it. So I'm telling you who we are, and there's a depth of wisdom and knowledge that our people possess that they are wanting and busting to share with somebody who wants to have value around that knowledge and not go off and get a PhD out of it, but to get a relationship out of it. And that's what's really important. Yeah.
All right. Look, the way I see it, at the end of the day, everything's about fairness. And just for a lighter moment, I'll tell you what had happened once. I was a prosecutor in ACT, and the defendant was unrepresented. And I was before the Chief Justice prosecuting. And I said a lot of things in my submission that was in favor of the defendant who was unrepresented. And the Chief Justice said to me, Mr. Saukhan, I think you've done the right thing because he's not represented. So you've done the right thing by bringing all that to my attention. And my response was, Your Honor, despite my color, I'm very fair.
Good on ya.
All right. So look, with that, I think I'll now, sorry, Sue.
And Philip.
Yeah. All right, Philip, your turn. Thanks for relieving me.
Hi, Philip. How are you? Long time no see. Lovely to see you. Yeah. You snuck in, eh?
Snuck in. So you can see on your program that I'm going to say a little bit about the proposal for a multi-faith council of Australia. And I've had a blessed day because this is the second Indigenous professor I've listened to in the one day. Yes. So earlier in the day in this parliament, I listened to Professor Stan Grant leading a discussion about how we renew democracy in Australia. And he led a brilliant discussion that included a couple of the independents from the parliament, Allegra Spender, who yesterday initiated the motion on anti-Semitism, which went through the parliament, and David Pocock as well as Michelle Grattan, you know, the legendary journalist of politics. And, you know, so there's two things about that. First is just the capacity of these two Indigenous professors, which, you know, at the end of the day has been so lovely and such a blessing and such a nurturing achievement of the day. But the second part of it really is being here and having these discussions through the day just reinforces how important it is for us to have a national multi-faith council working in association with the federal government.
And what we've been doing here tonight is really nurturing that culture of dialogue. We've been really reinforcing how important it is that we cultivate a good culture of dialogue. The beautiful invitation to come on country, I know from my times in WA and up on the north coast of New South Wales, the invitation to sit on country, to listen, to learn, are some of the most beautiful experiences, most nurturing experiences of my entire now reasonably long life. And I think I learned from them how important it is, and you underscored that, dear Professor Anne, about continuing to be curious. That's what keeps us vital, isn't it? If we stay curious about one another, always have that mind that we can learn more from one another, look for the way that friendship can develop as we're curious in a careful way with one another, being really present to one another, not just going to country for 10 minutes, coming out of the hotel, going back again and leaving. It's really to be present in a way that makes it possible for relationships to be coloured in, to become deep, and for understanding to be rich. And then it becomes possible to imagine, what might this country yet be? And you've been really, in your response to the questions, you've been really asking us, inviting us to think about what yet might be the nature of this Australia. So this initiative to shape a multi-faith council, a national multi-faith council, you'd have to say it's incredibly timely, don't you think?
Yeah.
Now, I've got the experience from coming from Victoria of our multi-faith advisory group in Victoria. It was a state government initiative after 9/11. And it came when we first started coming together, and I've been a member of it ever since. We realised there was an extraordinary lack of understanding, lack of knowledge, lack of relationship between people from different faith traditions. And I know from my years on that council, that Victorian-based council, that the fruit of it has been, there have been issues that have come up, but because we had that framework in which we could meet, and because we had developed relationships, there have been all sorts of things that might have exploded into the public domain and created serious lacks of social cohesion, which have been able to be managed quietly and carefully because of that council and that place of coming together and meeting. But that too goes with the fact that friendships have shaped. And in the end, that's what creates beautiful dialogue, isn't it? And creates a feeling that we're really going somewhere together when we have that experience, that feeling of friendship together. So this is such a timely initiative, such an important initiative, really, and we realise really what's been taking place and what the trajectory will be unless we put in place ways by which our whole of our Australian society can meet carefully and constructively in dialogue that leads us to really, I've had a lot to do, and yarning circles from our Indigenous culture are paralleled by similar dialogue methods in other countries. And I've had a lot to do with the ones from the Pacific, and a number of you are here from Fiji, and the Fijian community at the UN climate change conferences, when they were co-chair, initiated the Talanoa dialogues. And the Talanoa dialogues have now become very much part of every one of the UN COPs, the conferences of the parties. And essentially, the principles are every voice matters, every voice has to be heard, you have to sit with it until everybody has been well listened to, and you really just ask yourselves three simple questions. Okay, where are we? Where are we up to? And, people will share their ideas about where we're up to and different perceptions. And then where do we want to get to? Where are we trying to go? What's the direction we want to head in? And then how do we get there? So it's not, it's not complicated. In fact, it's simplicity makes the possibility of deep dialogue feasible. You know, where are we up to? And people will share perceptions at the minute about where Australia's up to. You've been sharing some tonight. We've heard quite a lot in the public domain in recent weeks about the threats to social cohesion. Where are we up to? Where do we want to get to? Time to renew our yearning to be a really, as in the title, a harmonious interfaith society where everybody feels respected and cared for. And okay, if that's the goal, if that's what we want, how do we get there? And then we can start to focus, as you did tonight, on the sort of initiatives that will take us in that direction. So you can look up the detail of the proposal that's now before the government. And thank you for all the work that you over here on this table did with Philippa to put it all together, getting in the submission right on time. Timing's everything. And we're just waiting now to hear, and the hope is that there'll be significant funding that will allow us to birth this initiative, and your invitation tonight fits right into there as something that could be properly resourced, like that assembly we both were at, you know, a little while back.
Yeah.
We could be something that then becomes part of the initial work of this multi-faith national multi-faith council. So the detail of that would be available, I think, on the website. Yes, says the website master with a sweet wave. It's there on the website, so you can look it up and see the detail. And my point and purpose now is just really to affirm, in the context of what Professor Anne has said, how timely and important it is. Amen. That's it.
It's not the end of his duties, because he will come back and give us a prayer at the end. But I think the last thing that I was going to share with you briefly and is also just something that came through the Multi-Faith Association of South Australia, where I am the president and have been for 8 years. And in 2015, we were talking about what we were going to do about the Reclaim Australia rallies. And in our meeting, we decided there was no point going and sitting on the opposite corner of the street. The Reclaim Australia rallies were people having rallies telling Muslims to go home. So our meeting was discussing, what are we going to do with that? And we had a visitor, actually, Reverend Leonard Faulkner from the Dandenongs. And from the conversation we had with him, we shaped what we called our commitment to interfaith harmony. And it was first read aloud in St. Francis Xavier Catholic Cathedral in Adelaide after the Christchurch massacres in New Zealand, when an Australian massacred 52 Muslims at prayer. So that is something that I'd like to leave with you. I have copies, a few that I could share with you, in the revisiting of it. And what we tried to do was to pay respect more fully in a national way. So the first phrase, commitment to peace and interfaith harmony in Australia, we acknowledge Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander traditional custodians who've cared for these lands and waters and seas for centuries, and pay respect to their elders, past and present, across the many First Nations of this country. And then it goes on to offer the citizens of Australia our common commitment to seek to live together in peace and goodwill. This desire arises not only from our common humanity, but also from our being people of faith and people of prayer. Recognising that as neighbours, we've got responsibilities to the community, to the world, and to ourselves. So we seek to reduce the threat of climate change to our earth and to future generations, and commit to reduce our emissions and support vulnerable communities, to live in harmony with each other and the environment that sustained us all, taking only what we need and sharing our resources. So we respectfully invite all citizens of Australia, of all faiths and none, to put aside intolerance, prejudice and divisiveness, and to strive for peaceful and fruitful coexistence in our country and the wider world. So thank you for the time for sharing part of that with you. My cheat sheet has evaporated, Sue, so I don't know. Oh, there we go. That's because I left it very badly of me on the. So I believe that I now pass back to Philip to ask us all to pray and meditate for the Multi-Faith Council. Thank you.
So as we complete our evening, and it looks like there's some lovely supper at the back, so let's just be prayerful and meditative in our way. Let a little gratitude rise up in our hearts. A gratitude that encompasses King Abdullah of Jordan and his initiative with this UN Interfaith Harmony Week. Its opportunities for renewal. Gratitude in our hearts for Professor Anne and her perseverance, notwithstanding all the things that she knows vividly, and her yearning to truly see, as we sing in our national anthem, that we are one and free. In gratitude rise in our hearts for the company of one another, company of those on Zoom, the intelligence of their questions and concerns that they've shared with us. And as we go our ways now into the evening, praying, meditating for our loved ones near and far, for their well-being and ours. And praying and meditating for their peace and ours. As we complete our prayer and our meditation, we might open our eyes and turn to the one beside us and next to us and give them, through our smile and the gesture of our hands, a greeting of peace.
Thank you.